Hi, it's Verity from the creative team and welcome back to the Wow Embossing Powder YouTube channel. Today I've got 3 fabulous modern monochromatic cards to hopefully inspire you to try out this kind of colour scheme on your next paper crafting projects. I go from simple to easy to even more simple. So let's get started. So this first technique is going to use the Watermark Stamping from the Wow Embossing pad to help create that monochromatic colour scheme. So for this card I am using the Altenew Darling Rose to create the card. First of all, I am stamping the Darling Rose with my Wow Embossing Powder pad onto some Gina K Designs sea glass cardstock, and I'm doing this because I want to then colour this in with my colouring pencils, and using the Watermark pad it means I can colour over that line and you're not going to really see it and you'll get a lovely no line colouring effect. So I'm starting off, I'm just going to show you some of the colouring because it did take me a while to colour this rose in. I will be honest, it's not a quick card to create this first one, although the actual monochromatic aspect of it's quite simple. It will take a bit of time, so I'm just going to show you a little bit of the colouring. So I'm starting off by using 2 different shades of teal and 1 white pencil. So I often put my darkest colour where I believe the shadows to be, the white where the highlights will be, and then I go between and blend with the middle colour, and I go back between the colours adding layers. So you want to start off quite lightly, and that will allow you to then build up the layers, blend the colours and get a lovely smooth transition. So I tend to add the darker teal to the shadows at the base of the petals, and wherever there is kind of a fold of the petal to add that darker depth and dimension to help allow it to give a bit more of a 3D look. The white pencil will tend to be on the highlights of the petal, that's usually on the tips, or depending on if the petal is a bit curved, it will be in sort of the curved area where the light might be shining on it. I'm going to just fast forward some of this up just to speed it along because it, as I say, is a long colouring process, and I just want you to see what it looks like as I'm adding the colours. So as you can see here, I've done quite a lot of the colouring. I have really sped forward the process and I really love the look of this effect. Using a similar colour cardstock to the pencils that you're going to use also really helps create that seamless blend between the colours, because the highlight can also be part of the coloured cardstock and you don't feel you need to apply as much colour if it was white. Once it was completely coloured and I was happy with all the areas, adding a little bit more darkness to those shadows just to give it that little bit more realistic look of shadows within the base of the petals and a bit more definition, I then used my scissors to fussy cut around the edge of the flower. Now I went right up against the petal. It's not too much of a difficult shape to fussy cut out. There's not too many sharp edges, it's quite simple, easy and quick to do, but if you prefer you could use a die or use your scan and cut or silhouette machine to cut this out. Now once this was cut out and coloured, I've then got it to be able to place on my card panel and play about with the position of the watermark stamping I'm going to do on the background to add monochromatic look to the background of the card. So I'm going to stamp some more of the roses and also some of the leaves that come in the stamp set. And I've used one of my misty corners just to pop the card panel out a bit in my misty, allowing me to overhang some of the stamps off the edge of the card. It just gives it a bit more of a realistic look. It looks a little bit more natural to have some of them hanging off the card when you're stamping them. So once I've got them in rough position and I was placing a few leaves behind the actual flower where I'm going to place it, I can then pick that up with my misty door. And I'm going to go in with my Wow Embossing pad. So this Wow Embossing pad, which is clear ultra slow drying, is perfect for heat embossing, but you can also use it for a watermark effect. And this means what it will do is it will stamp down onto the card and create a watermark in whatever you're stamping in a slightly darker colour shade of the cardstock. So here it's going to be a darker teal colour. Now I do it several times just to really intensify the colour, to really make it look clear and darker. Now it will give you a bit of tone on tone stamping as well without having to worry have you got the right colour ink to hand. Don't worry if you've got this embossing pad, you'll be able to do tone on tone stamping in any colour no matter what the cardstock is. You do not need to have a full range of coloured ink pads. So once I've done that, I just keep repositioning the leaves, repositioning the flowers, and just adding more stamping around the edge until I'm quite happy with the overall look of the background. Now for the sentiment, I have heat embossed two of the sentiments from the Darling Rose Altenew stamp set. This reads, "Hello there, darling," and I've stamped this on some G&K Tranquil Teal cardstock, and I've heat embossed this in bright opaque white embossing powder from Wow. This just really pops off that lovely dark teal cardstock, and that pairs well with the colour scheme of the rest of the card, sort of marrying up with the dark areas of the rose. Now I'm just trimming these down to add them onto the front of the card to provide two different strips, just to add a little bit more interest to the card. And I've foam mounted those onto the front of the card, as well as foam mounting the rose, and I've just tucked the Darling behind the rose just to add a little bit more interest. It really connects well with the sentiment and the rose. To finish the card off, I'm using a few Little Lucy's sequins. This is the Starlight Sequin Mix, which is a lovely iridescent colour, and it has some of the teal turquoise colours in it that just draws from the colour scheme of the card. And I just love how this really turned out. It's beautiful. Okay, so for the second technique for monochromatic cards, we are going to use colour match heat embossing. So I'm going to be using a simple stamp, a few dies, and a colour matched heat embossing powder. So I have the Pink Fresh Studios Colour Block Gradiating Stripes rubber stamp here, and because it's rubber, I have taken out my foam pad in my Misty in order to use the rubber stamp. Now I'm going to use some G&K Tranquil Teal cardstock, and in order to be able to pick this up without getting my grubby fingers all over it when I'm adding the embossing powder, I have added a temporary handle on the back of this by adding some repositionable tape to the back of my card panel, and then adding a handle to that as well. And I'm just prepping my cardstock because I do get my fingerprints all over all the time, so this just prevents the oil from my fingerprints becoming sticky enough to pick up any of the embossing powder. So I'm using my WowEmbossingPowder Clear Ultra Slow Drying Embossing Pad again, just to ink up my stamp and close the Misty door to stamp it. Now because this is quite a big rubber stamp, there's quite a lot of big bold areas, I am going to go back and stamp this several times just to ensure that I get a really good coverage of ink all over those stripes. Okay, so for this card, I am colour matching it using Sea of Tranquility embossing powder. This comes in the Seth Apter Wow Trio Cosmic Powder selection, and this is a beautiful teal turquoise colour that has some flecks of glitter in and little bits of gold and white. So it's not purely just teal or turquoise, it's got a little bit more interest to it, and it really adds to that monochromatic scheme because it's not completely one flat colour. It's got a little bit more depth and interest to add to that background. Now as this heat sets, you can just see the colour changing, and as it's opaque, you won't see the dark teal from behind the card popping through in those stripes. They will just be there visible in between your stripes. So it really gives a different kind of take on sort of the monochromatic look. So for this card, I'm using the Julie Hickey Designs Lower Alphabet Case dies. Now these is quite a really great set because there are dies in here for the whole of the alphabet, but for several letters there are multiple dies of that. So for Happy Birthday, I was able to spell out Happy B-Day in dies and not have to recut one die twice because there were several P's, several A's, several Y's as well. So that was perfect. Now, to not detract from the monochromatic background, I'm keeping this with a white colour scheme. Neutrals can work well with monochromatic colour schemes. So I die cut these from white card, and once they were die cut, I then used some foam pads to raise the letters up. And I used two different sort of depths of foam pads to give a bit of variation in the word. And whilst I'm adding them to the card, I'm not adding them in a nice straight line, just giving it a bit of interest and fun to the card. I'm alternating the height of each letter. So to finish this card off, I found a sentiment from the Altenew Sentiment Strips stamp set that read, "Many congrats to you." Well, I didn't want to use the many congrats, so I only inked up the word "to you," and I stamped this on some black cardstock to then heat emboss in bright opaque white embossing powder. And then I trimmed this strip down to a nice thin strip and foam mounted that onto the front of the card. Now I finished the rest of the card off screen by just adding a few white Nouveau drops just to embellish the front of the card. Okay, so for the last technique, we are going to use neutral heat embossing colours for the monochromatic look. So you can use neutral colours along with a colour for a monochromatic colour scheme. So here, I'm going to be stamping onto a blue piece of cardstock. This is blue denim from Gina K Designs. And I've added a temporary handle to the back. We're using the previous technique with repositionable tape, so I can easily pick my panel up and handle it without getting my fingerprints all over it. I'm using an acrylic block to stamp this because I'm going to do a lot of repeat stamping. It's so much easier to use an acrylic block rather than keep moving everything in your MISTI. And what I'm doing is I'm taking one of the snowflakes from the Catherine Pooler Chillin Snowflakes stamp set, and I'm using an round acrylic block to then stamp this with the Wow Clear Ultra Slow Drying Embossing ink to then cover in High Heels Embossing Powder. So this is an embossing glitter. It's a beautiful silver mix, and this pairs so beautifully with the blue because it's a lovely neutral silver. It goes really well with a blue colour scheme. Now I'm covering each sort of row of stamping as I go along, but I'm not heat embossing until the end. So I want to stamp and cover in all the embossing powder all the way up, and then once it's completely stamped and covered, I can then heat emboss it. And this will help reduce the warping to the card because I'm only applying the heat once to the card. I'm not repeatedly heating up that card, which will increase the amount of warpage you'll get. Now I've just sped it up so you can see that I'm moving and changing the position of the snowflakes so the pattern alternates a little bit, gives it a bit more variation. And I'm also stamping off the edge of the card, which makes it look more realistic that this was a natural piece of pattern paper you trimmed down to add to the card. Now a tip when you are heat embossing glitter is to do it from behind. Make sure you have really heated up the embossing gun quite well before you bring it to the cardstock. That will help again reduce the amount of warping to the card because you're not needing to heat the card for as long because you've got a nice hot gun. And if you heat it from behind, this will allow the embossing powder to melt and trap the glitter in it before it gets a chance to blow off. If you do it from the front, the power of the heat gun might blow off some of the glitter before the embossing powder has had a chance to trap it and melt it, so it may not have that much glitter and shine when you do it from the front. You can start it off at the back and then finish it off the front if you're unsure if it's completely melted, but at least it will have trapped some of your powder. So once this is completely heated, you will see the beautiful shine that you get from this embossing glitter. Now to finish this card off, I added a stamped sentiment from the Chilling Snowflakes stamp set. Just stamped this in Catherine Pooler's Juniper Mist ink, which is a lovely blue, again to go with that monochromatic scheme. And to finish it off, I am then using some blue sequins. These sequins come from Lucy's Little Things, and this is the Atlantic sequin mix. So again, adding that blue just to tie in with that colour scheme. And also, the shine from the sequins also pairs well with the silver sparkle shine as well. So you can create a monochromatic card with a colour scheme that also has some neutrals in it just to add a little bit of variation. I hope all three cards today have inspired you to try a monochromatic colour scheme for your cards. It can really help create a modern look to your cards, whether it's just as simply using the embossing pad for watermark stamping or using the embossing powders to colour match or add some neutral shine to it. So we would love to know which out of the three of these cards is your favourite, and let us know below. I think mine was the rose, but that did take me the longest. So for the quickest one, I think I preferred the Happy Birthday to You card. If you liked today's video, please think about subscribing to the channel, and why not give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. You can also hit that bell icon to be notified when the next video is up. If you want to check out my personal channel, Pretty Little Button, I've included a link here as well as down below. You will find links to the products used in today's video in the description box below. And for a 10% discount at the WOW shop, just use the code you can see on screen. Until next time, happy crafting!